When collecting rent, the millionaire is paralyzed seeing an exhausted boy sewing. Richard Montgomery checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The rent for that apartment in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood was already 3 months overdue. And as the owner of one of the largest real estate development companies in the country, he couldn't simply ignore it. It wasn't about the money. That amount was insignificant by his standards, but about principle. Numbers were numbers. Rules were rules. If I make an exception for one, everyone will want one, he thought, as he parked his imported Porsche on the pothole-ridden street of Englewood. The old building contrasted sharply with the modern edifices his company built on the other side of the city. Richard adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and climbed the 4 flights of stairs. Since the elevator was broken, he knocked on the door of apartment 402, prepared to face screaming tears or flimsy excuses. "Who is it?" a child's voice asked from the other side. Disconcerted, Richard replied, "I'm the owner of the apartment. I need to speak with Teresa Oliver." The door opened slowly. A skinny boy, no more than 7 years old, appeared holding a needle and thread. His fingers were marked with small punctures, and deep circles under his eyes contrasted with his still childish face. "My mum isn't here. She's in the hospital." Richard swallowed hard, confused. He looked inside the simple apartment and noticed fabric spread across the sofa, a table with bread crusts, and a picture of Teresa with the boy. "Are you alone here?" he asked, entering slowly. "Yes, I'm sewing to earn money. Mrs. Iris from 201 taught me and gives me work sometimes," replied the boy, returning to the sofa where he was working on a delicate embroidery. "What's your name?" "Michael. You came to collect the rent, right?" "I know we're behind." Richard felt something strange in his chest. Before him wasn't a delinquent tenant, but a child with sunken eyes and calloused hands trying to survive alone. "How long has your mother been hospitalized?" 22 days. She has a blood disease. I visit her when I can afford the bus fare, but I can't go often because I need to finish these sewing projects. Richard sat down bewildered. He, who solved everything with spreadsheets and meetings, didn't know what to do faced with this raw reality. His calculating mind began processing. Information. A child alone, a hospitalized mother, overdue bills. "Are you eating properly?" Michael shrugged. "I eat what I can buy. Sometimes Mrs. Iris brings food. Yesterday I got bread from the bakery." Richard looked at the half-open refrigerator, practically empty. In the sink, a single dirty plate. The apartment, despite being simple, was clean and organized. This boy was doing the impossible to maintain himself. "Can I see what you're sewing?" Michael showed his small work, an embroidery with the phrase, "Stay strong, Mom." His small fingers handled the needle with surprising skill. "It's a gift. I'll take it when I can visit her again." Richard felt his heart tighten. Without thinking twice, he took out his wallet, removed all the bills he had, and placed them on the table. "This is for you to buy food and visit your mother." "Which hospital is she in?" "Mercy Hospital, but I can't accept so much money, sir." "Yes, you can. Consider it an advance for your work," improvised Richard, surprising himself. When he left the apartment, Richard was no longer the same. The numbers in his mind had been replaced by images. Michael's marked fingers, his tired eyes, the embroidery, for his sick mother. In the elevator of his luxury office, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He opened his cell phone and called his assistant. "Claudia, cancel my afternoon schedule and find Dr. Marcus's contact at Mercy Hospital. I have an urgent situation to resolve." Late at night, sitting in his penthouse apartment, Richard contemplated the city view. There he was, owner of a fortune built with coldness and calculation, completely shaken by a 7-year-old boy. Something had changed, and there was no spreadsheet in the world that could explain what he felt. He decided that, for the first time in his life, he would act without planning. Michael couldn't stay alone, not for one more day. Richard wakes, up before his alarm goes off. The sleepless night is reflected on his face, but a different energy drives him. In his schedule, normally filled with corporate meetings, he had blocked the entire morning for a single task: visiting Mercy Hospital. After a quick call to his lawyer, he headed to the location. The antiseptic corridors of the public hospital contrasted with the private clinics he frequented. Hurried nurses, patients waiting on stretchers in the hallways, the smell of medications. In the oncology department, Richard found the doctor responsible for Teresa Oliver's case. "The situation is difficult," explained Dr. Sarah, flipping through the medical record. "Advanced stage leukemia. Teresa hasn't responded well to conventional treatments." "Is there any alternative?" asked Richard. "There's an experimental treatment at Northwestern Cancer Institute, but it's extremely expensive and not covered by insurance. Very few patients can access it." Richard didn't even blink before responding. "Arrange the transfer. I'll cover all. Costs?" The doctor looked at him, surprised. "Are you a relative?" "I'm a family friend," he hesitated. "Can I see her?" Teresa was asleep when Richard entered the room. Her fragile figure, connected to tubes and monitors, was a reminder of the human fragility he used to ignore in his business life. He approached the bed and, even without knowing her, felt an inexplicable connection with this fighter of a woman, mother of an extraordinary boy. On his way back to the office, Richard stopped at a grocery store and bought enough food to fill Michael's pantry. When he arrived at the apartment, he found the boy sitting on the living room floor concentrating on his sewing. "I brought some things for you," he said, depositing the bags in the small kitchen. The look of amazement on the boy's face was replaced by a shy smile. "Thank you, sir, but you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. And I have more news. Your mother will be transferred to a specialized institute. They have new treatments that might help her." Michael dropped his needle and thread, his eyes watering. "But that must cost a lot of money." "Don't worry about that. I just want you to promise to study and rest more. A child shouldn't be sewing all day." "I'm behind in school," confessed Michael, embarrassed. "Since Mom got sick, it's been hard to go every day." Richard sat down next to the boy. "Starting tomorrow, you're going back to school. I'll make sure everything is okay." On his way out, he met Mrs. Iris in the hallway, a gray-haired lady with a suspicious expression. "Are you related to Michael?" "No, I'm the owner of the apartment." The lady narrowed her eyes. "So you came to collect the rent? That boy suffers enough, you know." "Actually, I came to help," replied Richard. "Could you give me your phone number? I'd like your help in looking after him while I resolve his mother's situation." On his way back to the office, Richard received a call from Claudia, his administrator. "Richard, the board is questioning your disappearance. We have the quarterly closing, and you've cancelled 3 important meetings today." "I had a personal emergency," he replied dryly. "Personal? Since when do you prioritize personal matters over the company?" Claudia questioned, with a tone mixing curiosity and censure. Richard realized that for the first time in 15 years, he hadn't put Montgomery Developments first. And more surprisingly, he didn't regret it. "Things are changing, Claudia," he replied, ending the call. As he entered his luxurious office, on the top floor of the commercial building, Richard found his executive team gathered, tense expressions stamped on their faces. In the center of the room, Claudia Thompson, chief administrator and Richard's right hand for a decade, held a folder of documents with a contained smile on her lips. "Finally decided to honor us with your presence, Richard," she said, pointing to the wall clock marking almost 5 in the afternoon. Richard ignored the provocation and sat at the head of the table. "What's the urgency of this unscheduled meeting?" Claudia opened the folder and distributed some papers to those present. "We're concerned about some recent financial inconsistencies, significant personal transfers, use of company resources for matters unrelated to business." Richard felt his blood freeze. In his rush to help Michael and Teresa, he had mixed accounts, used the corporate card to pay the hospital. "These are private matters that I can explain later," he replied firmly. "Now we need to focus on the launch of the Horizon residences." "Impossible to separate things when you committed almost $500,000 in less than 24 hours, retorted Claudia, displaying bank statements. "The board demands immediate explanations." Richard faced the room. Those executives in impeccable suits with calculating expressions were a reflection of what he himself had been until he met Michael. How could he explain the transformation he had felt? how to justify that now there was something more important than profits and acquisitions. "I made a personal investment," he replied vaguely. "In what exactly?" insisted Claudia, with an almost predatory gleam in her eye. "In humanity," replied Richard, standing up. "The meeting is adjourned for today." In the following days, Richard created a routine divided between the office and Michael's apartment. He hired a companion to stay with the boy while he was at school, ensured the refrigerator was always stocked, and every afternoon took him to visit Teresa at the new medical institute. During one of these visits, while Michael was talking with his mother, Richard observed the scene with a lump in his throat. Teresa, even debilitated, lit up in the presence of her son. "Why are you doing all this for us?" she asked when Michael went to get water. Richard hesitated. "Honestly, I don't even know how to explain it. Your son, he made me see the world differently." Teresa smiled weakly. "Michael has that gift. He never stopped smiling, even in the worst moments. Did you know he's been sewing since he was 5? He learned by himself watching videos. He said he wanted to help me with the bills." That night, as he left Michael at the apartment, Richard received an alarming call from Mrs. Iris. "Mr. Montgomery, there was a process server here today. He," says Mrs. Oliver, "and the boy will be evicted tomorrow morning." "What? That's impossible. I'm the owner and gave no eviction order." "Well, they brought a document with your signature notarized." Richard felt his stomach sink. Someone was acting behind his back, and he had a strong suspicion of who it might be. Upon returning to the company the next morning, he found his office ransacked, documents missing. On the computer screen, a single open email message, a formal request for Richard's removal from the presidency, alleging misappropriation of resources and irregular behavior, signed by Claudia Thompson and endorsed by 3 directors. The war was declared. But Richard hadn't imagined that the first target would be precisely Michael and his mother. He needed to act quickly to protect them, while fighting not to lose everything he had built. Descending the steps of the company he had taken years to build, Richard felt strangely calm. What once would have been his worst nightmare, losing control of Montgomery Developments, now seemed secondary to the urgency of protecting Michael. He sent a message to his personal lawyer, Dr. Paul Mitchell. "Emergency, meet me at the apartment on Maple Street 154 in an hour." On the way, he tried to call Mrs. Iris's cell phone several times without success. Chicago's traffic seemed to conspire against him. Each red light increased his distress. When he finally arrived at the building, he saw a small gathering at the entrance. Process servers, 2 private security guards, and Claudia, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, supervising everything with a cold smile. "Richard, what a surprise to find you here," she said with false cordiality. "Just carrying out judicial orders. This property has significant debts that need to be settled." "You know perfectly well that's a lie," he replied through clenched teeth. "Where's the boy?" "The tenant's son." Claudia raised an eyebrow. "Not our problem. Social Services has been notified." Richard felt his blood boil. He pushed past the security guards and climbed the stairs 2 at a time. On the 4th floor, the door to apartment 402 was open. Inside, Michael was huddled in a corner, hugging a small backpack and his sewing box, while men removed the few pieces of furniture. "Michael," called Richard, crossing the room. The boy raised his face, marked by silent tears. "Mr. Montgomery, they said we need to leave. Where will I go? How will I visit my mom?" Richard knelt before him. "You'll stay with me. No one is going to separate you from your mother, I promise." At that moment, Dr. Paul Mitchell arrived, breathless. "I got an emergency injunction," he said, showing the document. "They cannot execute the eviction without a formal hearing." The process servers consulted the papers, visibly confused. Claudia, who had come up, watched the scene with poorly disguised irritation. "This is just a postponement, Richard," she stated. "The board has already decided. The company is under new management, and your personal charities will no longer be funded with our money." "My money, Claudia." "My company," corrected Richard, taking Michael by the hand. "And you just made a mistake that will cost your career." In the car, Michael remained quiet, clutching his sewing box. I'm afraid, the boy finally confessed. What if we can't go back? All my mum's memories are there. Richard gripped the steering wheel, determined. We'll get everything back, Michael, and in the meantime, you and your mother will be safe. Trust me. In Richard's penthouse apartment, in Lakeshore Tower, Michael looked fascinated at the city view. He had never been so high, had never seen Chicago from that angle, a sea of lights stretching to the horizon. For Richard, observing the boy discovering this new world was like seeing the city for the first time. "Do you live here alone?" asked Michael, timidly touching the grand piano that decorated the living room. "Yes," replied Richard. "I never married. I always prioritized work." "Aren't you sad?" The simple question hit Richard like a punch. Sad? He had never allowed himself to stop and think about it. He had occupied every minute of his life, building an empire, crushing competitors, multiplying fortunes. Happiness or sadness weren't part of the equation. Sometimes, he admitted, surprised by his own sincerity. "But now you're here." Michael smiled, and for the first time since he'd met him, Richard saw a genuinely childish gleam in his eyes. The next morning, Richard prepared breakfast while Michael slept in the guest room. His cell phone wouldn't stop ringing. Board members, lawyers, journalists sniffing out the scandal at Montgomery Developments. He ignored all calls except one, Dr. Marcus from Northwestern Cancer Institute. "Mr. Montgomery, Teresa is asking for her son. She senses something is wrong. Tell her we're fine and we'll visit her this afternoon. Don't worry her with details." When Michael woke up, Richard had already organized his new routine, enrolled in a nearby school, new clothes, and a social worker recommended by the hospital to help with the necessary documentation for temporary care. "Aren't you going to work today?" asked Michael as they ate pancakes. "I have more important work here," replied Richard, helping him arrange his backpack for school. In the empty apartment, Richard finally faced the dozens of messages. The most concerning was from Sergio, a board member and his oldest friend. "Claudia presented evidence of millions in misappropriations. Says you're protecting delinquent tenants for obscure personal reasons. The board is calling a vote for your permanent removal. We need to talk." Meanwhile, in Claudia Thompson's apartment, the administrator analyzed old documents found in Teresa's apartment. Among them, a yellowed birth certificate caught her attention. As she read the names of Michael's biological parents, her face paled. She quickly tucked the document into her folder, a disturbed expression on her usually controlled countenance. In the afternoon, Richard and Michael visited Teresa. She seemed more fragile, but her eyes came alive seeing her son. "We're living, say with Mr. Montgomery for now, Mom," explained Michael, showing drawings he had made at his new school. "His apartment has an incredible view." Teresa looked at Richard with gratitude and concern. "I don't want to be a burden. You've already done too much for us." "You're not a burden," replied Richard, holding her debilitated hand. "Michael has taught me more about life in a few days than I learned in decades of business." In the hospital, Corridor Dr. Marcus called Richard for a private conversation. "The experimental treatment shows promising results, but the condition is still serious. Teresa will need constant care, perhaps for months." Richard nodded. "Do whatever is necessary, Doctor. Cost is not an issue." "It's not just a financial matter," replied the doctor. "The boy needs stability. Are you sure you can offer that?" The question echoed in Richard's mind as he drove back home. Michael was silent in the back seat, sewing a small embroidery. "What are you making?" asked Richard through the rearview mirror. "A gift for you," replied the boy without raising his eyes, "to thank you for everything." At that moment, Richard made his decision. He called Dr. Paul. "I need you to prepare the documents to request temporary guardianship of Michael Oliver, and I want a complete investigation into Claudia Thompson. Something tells me she has a personal interest in this case, beyond ambition for the company." The morning began with a storm battering Chicago, as if the sky reflected the turbulence in Richard's life. He adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, preparing to face the Montgomery Developments Board for the first time since the scandal broke. Michael observed from the bedroom door, holding a small umbrella. "Will you be able to keep your company?" asked the boy, genuine concern in his childish voice. Richard smiled, lowering himself to eye level with the child. You know, Michael, a few weeks ago I would have said that nothing in the world was more important than that company. Today I'm certain there are much more valuable things. Like what? Like seeing your mother recover, like seeing you go to school without having to worry about rent or food, like doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. Michael extended a small package made of fabric scraps, for good luck. Inside was a delicate embroidery, a house with 3 hand-holding figures, a woman, a man, and a boy. Below the words, "Our family," Richard felt a lump in his throat. On the way to the headquarters of the development company, Dr. Paul called with surprising news. "Richard, we discovered something. Claudia Thompson isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Carol Oliver. She legally changed it 15 years ago when she left Miami." "Oliver? Like Teresa?" "Exactly. Everything indicates they're sisters." The revelation hit Richard like lightning. The pieces began to fit together. Claudia's obsessive interest in the case, the speed with which she acted to evict Teresa and Michael, the mysterious documents. Upon arriving at the company, he found the lobby full of journalists. The story of the powerful businessman removed for diverting resources to help a needy family had leaked to the press. Cameras flashed when he walked through the glass doors, but Richard remained impassive. In the meeting room, the complete board was waiting. Claudia at the center, a folder of documents in front of her, and a confident smile on her lips. "Richard, good that you decided to honor us," she said. "We were about to vote on your permanent removal." "Before that, I have some questions, Carol," replied Richard, emphasizing her real name. Claudia's smile froze. The board members exchanged confused looks. "What did you call me?" "Carol Oliver, sister of Teresa Oliver and biological aunt of Michael," continued Richard, placing on the table the documents brought by Dr. Paul. "The woman who abandoned her family 15 years ago changed her name and built a new identity." The board members watched in astonishment as Richard exposed the truth. "You forged eviction documents against your own sick sister and your nephew. You used company resources for that, not me. Each transfer you presented as evidence against me was, in fact, authorized by you yourself, using my electronic signature." Claudia stood up, her face a mask of fury. "You have no proof. I have the digital records, the security camera footage from your office, and the testimony of the secretary you instructed to falsify documents," replied Richard calmly. "The question is why? Why so much hatred against your own family?" For the first time, Claudia seemed to lose control. "Family? Teresa stole everything from me. Our parents left everything to her when they passed. And that boy isn't even her. Son, Michael is adopted, did you know that? She took him from a shelter when he was 2 years old, while I received nothing." A heavy silence fell over the room. The board members, previously ready to condemn Richard, now looked at Claudia with a mixture of shock and revulsion. Sergio, the dean of the board, cleared his throat. "I believe we need to reconsider today's agenda. Mr. Montgomery, on behalf of the board, we apologize for the inconvenience. As for Ms. Thompson, she will be escorted out and will answer legally for her actions." When Richard left the building, the rain had stopped. On the horizon, a rainbow appeared over the grey city. He took a deep breath, feeling an enormous weight leave his shoulders. Now he needed to tell Michael the truth, that his mother had chosen him, adopted him, loved him. That family wasn't a matter of blood, but of love. And perhaps, thought Richard as he drove to pick up the boy from school, that's what he himself was learning. That family could be built in the most unexpected circumstances, when the heart finally opens to what really matters. At the private school where Richard had enrolled Michael, teacher Lisa observed with curiosity the transformation of the boy. In just 2 weeks, the previously withdrawn child now actively participated in classes, asked questions, and, for the first time, played during breaks with other children. When Richard arrived to pick him up, she asked to speak privately. "Mr. Montgomery, I must congratulate you. Michael is flourishing. At first, I confess I found your situation strange. A single businessman, temporarily caring for a boy he barely knew. But I see it was the best thing that could happen to him." Richard smiled, watching Michael put his materials in his new backpack. Actually, teacher, I think it was the best thing that happened to both of us. In the car, Richard tried to find the right words to tell Michael about his adoption. The boy, however, was too excited to notice the adult's tension. The teacher said I can participate in the science fair. I'm going to do a project about different types of fabrics. Mrs. Iris said she'll help me with samples. Richard smiled, admiring the resilience of this child who, despite all adversities, kept alive his curiosity and enthusiasm for the world. At the hospital, Teresa seemed a little stronger. The first sessions of the experimental treatment showed promising results, although the path to recovery was still long and uncertain. Michael, why don't you buy a chocolate at the cafeteria? Suggested Richard, handing some bills to the boy. I need to talk to your mother. When they were alone, Richard told Teresa about Claudia and the recent discoveries. I imagined this day would come, sighed Teresa, with a mixture of sadness and relief. Carol never got over the past. When our parents died in an accident, she blamed me, said I was always the favorite, that they gave me everything, when, in reality, the inheritance was just debts and memories. And about Michael? Teresa smiled weakly. I found him in a shelter when he was 2 years old. No one wanted him because of a small defect in his left hand. She showed Richard how the boy's fingers were slightly crooked in the hand he used less. For me, it was love at first sight. He taught me to be strong when I thought I couldn't go on. Does he know? I never hid that he's adopted, but he was so young. I think he doesn't fully understand. For him, I'm simply his mother. Richard nodded, holding Teresa's fragile hand. And you are. Blood doesn't define family. When Michael returned with a hot chocolate for each of them, Teresa observed with emotion the natural interaction between the boy and Richard, the way they talked, the small gestures of affection, the trust that had been established between them. Silently, she said a prayer of gratitude for the businessman who had entered their lives as a collector and transformed into a guardian. Leaving the hospital, Michael unexpectedly asked, Richard, do you know how to drive a boat? I do, why? We're reading a book at school about a boy who sails with his father. I've never been on a boat. Richard smiled. This weekend we can go to Lake Michigan. I have a small sailboat there. What do you think? The gleam in Michael's eyes was answer enough. On the way back home, Richard reflected on how small joys, a boat ride, a hot chocolate, the security of a home, could mean so much. He, who had always measured success in millions, now found it in the smile of a boy who was relearning to be a child. In his office, late at night, Richard analyzed documents with his lawyer. Michael slept in the next room, exhausted after a day full of emotions. The temporary guardianship papers are ready, explained Dr. Paul, but there's something you need to consider, Richard. What will happen if Teresa doesn't make it? The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Richard contemplated the illuminated city through the panoramic window. Then Michael will have a permanent home with me, if he wants. The lawyer nodded, impressed by the transformation of his client, previously known for his coldness in business. I never imagined seeing you like this, Richard, willing to become a father at a moment's notice. Richard smiled, observing the embroidery that Michael had given him earlier, now framed on his desk. Our family. Neither did I, Paul, neither did I. Weeks turned into months, and a new routine established itself in Richard and Michael's life. The boy was completely adapted to his new school, took swimming lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and continued to visit Teresa daily at the hospital. The experimental treatment showed promising results. There were better and worse days, but Teresa fought with determination. Richard, in turn, completely reorganized his professional life. He delegated responsibilities, reduced his workload, and began working frequently from home. Montgomery Developments, previously known for its aggressiveness in the real estate market, now implemented a social housing program under his new directive. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Richard and Michael sailed calmly on Lake Michigan. The boy, already familiar with basic nautical terms, helped adjust the sails with his skilled small hands. Do you think Mom will be able to come sailing with us? Someday, asked Michael, looking at the horizon. Richard smiled, optimistic. I'm sure she will. Dr. Marcus said she's responding well to the treatment. I'm sewing something special for when she comes home, confided the boy. A patchwork quilt with all our stories. Richard watched Michael with admiration. His ability to maintain hope and find beauty, even in the most difficult circumstances, was a daily lesson. Michael, I know we never talked openly about this, but you know your mother adopted you when you were little, don't you? The boy nodded calmly, surprising Richard. Mom always told me she chose me among many children because our hearts matched, he replied naturally. She says family is who cares, not who has the same blood. Richard felt a wave of emotion hearing those simple and profound words. Your mother is a very wise woman. Is that why Aunt Carol was so angry? Because she doesn't understand what a real family is? Richard almost dropped the tiller, surprised. You know about your aunt? Michael shrugged. I heard you talking at the hospital. I wasn't sad. Mom chose me, and that's what matters. After a pause, he added, You chose us too, didn't you, Richard? With a lump in his throat, Richard just nodded, unable to express in words how much that choice had transformed his existence. Back at the apartment, they found a surprise. Mrs. Iris was waiting in the lobby with a cardboard box. I managed to recover more things from the old apartment, explained the lady. I thought the boy would like to have them back. Inside the box were old photos, some well-worn children's books, and a small teddy bear mended several times. Mr. Puff, exclaimed Michael, hugging the toy as if reuniting with a friend lost long ago. That night, putting Michael to bed, Richard noticed the bear carefully positioned on the pillow. He's always been with me, explained the sleepy boy. As far as I can remember, Mom says he was with me at the shelter. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating how simple objects could carry such deep stories. Mr. Puff seems like a great friend. He is, and now he has you too, murmured Michael before falling asleep. In the living room, Richard examined the photos recovered by Mrs. Iris. Among them, one caught his attention, a very young Teresa holding a newborn baby, next to another woman he recognized as Claudia, Carol. The sisters were smiling without any indication of the resentment that would later separate them. Turning the photo, he read the inscription, Teresa, Carol, and little Gregory, St. Luke's Hospital, 2018. Richard frowned, confused. Who was Gregory? According to his information, Michael had come into Teresa's life at age 2 from a shelter. A mystery presented itself, increasing even more his determination to protect this family that, unexpectedly, had also become his. A secret file, a mysterious adoption, a past that returns forcefully when least expected. On the second floor of Northwestern Cancer Institute, Teresa Oliver contemplated the city through the hospital room window. Her body responded slowly to the treatment, a battle against time that she fought not for herself, but for the son who was her reason for living. The door opened softly, and Dr. Marcus entered, followed by Richard. Good news, Teresa, announced the doctor, consulting recent tests. The values are improving consistently. If this continues, we can consider supervised discharge in a few weeks. Teresa smiled, tears of relief shining in her eyes. Does that mean I can go home? To Michael. With special care and frequent hospital visits, yes, replied the doctor. When Dr. Marcus left, Richard approached the bed holding Teresa's hand. Michael will be thrilled. He's been working on the room we prepared for you at home. Teresa hesitated. Richard, you've already done so much for us. I can't continue imposing this burden. It's not a burden, he replied firmly. Michael brought something to my life that I didn't even know was missing, and you are part of that. Teresa lowered her eyes, an internal conflict clearly visible in her expression. There are things you don't know about us, about Michael. Richard took a deep breath, deciding it was time for the truth. I found an old photograph. You, Claudia, and a baby named Gregory. The color left Teresa's face. Her hands trembled slightly. How? Mrs. Iris recovered some things from the old apartment. Teresa, who is Gregory? After a long silence, Teresa began to speak, her voice almost A whisper. Gregory was my nephew Carol's son. She got pregnant young. The father disappeared as soon as he found out. Our family was shattered after losing our parents. Carol didn't want the baby, but she didn't want to officially give him up either. She was too proud. And what happened? I helped raise Gregory in his first years. Carol sank into depression, then drugs, until one day she simply disappeared, leaving only a note saying she needed to start over. I fought in court for Gregory's custody, but without success, he was sent to a state shelter. When I finally managed to legally adopt him, 2 years later, he no longer responded to the name Gregory. The caregivers called him Michael. Richard sat down, stunned by the revelation. So Michael is Carol's biological son, my blood nephew, but in every sense that really matters, he is my son. He always will be. Why did Carol come back? Why try to evict you from the apartment? Teresa wiped away a tear. I'm not sure. Maybe remorse, maybe anger that I managed to get what she abandoned. I only know she never got over our past. Richard processed the information, connecting the dots. Claudia's obsession, her determination to separate mother and son, the visceral hatred she demonstrated. Does Michael know this? He was very young. He vaguely remembers Carol, but doesn't know she's his biological mother. For him, I'm the only mother he's known. That night, Richard drove back home with 1,000 thoughts swirling in his mind. That family story was even more complex and painful than he had imagined. Arriving at the apartment, he found Michael asleep on the sofa, surrounded by colorful fabric scraps, his project for the quilt he was preparing for his mother. Carefully, so as not to wake him, Richard carried him to bed. Observing the boy's serene face, he felt a certainty grow in his heart. Regardless of blood ties, legal complications, or ghosts of the past, that child and his mother had become his family, and he would do anything to protect them. The next day, Richard convened a meeting with Dr. Paul and a social worker recommended by the hospital. I want absolute legal guarantees, he explained, that no one, not even Claudia Thompson, can separate Michael from Teresa or from me should anything happen to her. The legal processes were initiated, but Richard knew he needed more than papers. He needed to build a solid foundation for the future, one where Michael could grow secure, regardless of the circumstances. The afternoon sun illuminated the spacious office of the Presidency of Montgomery Developments. Richard was finishing a video conference while observing, through the panoramic window, the frantic movement on Michigan Avenue. Years ago, this view represented everything he aspired to: power, success, control. Now, he could hardly wait to finish the meeting and pick up Michael from his guitar lesson, a new passion of the boy. So it's decided, concluded one of the directors on the screen. The New Beginnings project will be implemented in 5 communities initially, offering subsidized apartments for families in vulnerable situations, with priority for single mothers, added Richard, and a community center in each condominium, with daycare and educational support. When the meeting ended, Sergio, now vice president, remained on the call. I never imagined I would see Montgomery Developments leading social projects, he commented with a smile. But I confess that the positive impact is already reverberating, even among investors. The numbers continue to grow, replied Richard. We've just discovered that it's possible to profit without losing humanity in the process. Turning off the computer, Richard crossed the now redecorated office. On the once austere walls, colorful framed embroideries made by Michael brought life to the corporate environment. On his desk, next to spreadsheets and contracts, rested a recent photo. Him, Michael, and Teresa at a picnic in the park during one of the supervised outings from the hospital. In the hallway, he met Martin, Claudia's former assistant, now responsible for the financial department. Mr. Montgomery, we received news about Claudia Thompson, he informed, handing an envelope. She's in Miami, apparently working at a local real estate agency. Richard nodded. After the scandal and her forced departure from the company, Claudia had disappeared. Part of him felt sorry for that woman, consumed by grudges from the past, unable to recognize the treasure she had abandoned, a son who had grown to become an extraordinary child. Thank you, Martin. Keep me informed, but discreetly. At the music conservatory where Michael had lessons, Richard arrived a few minutes before schedule to observe without being noticed. Through the half-open door, he saw the boy concentrated, carefully fingering the guitar strings. His slightly crooked fingers on his left hand didn't hinder him. On the contrary, the teacher had commented that this particularity gave Michael a unique touch on the instrument. In recent weeks, the boy had visibly flourished. His once apprehensive eyes now shone with curiosity and confidence. He maintained his exceptional manual ability, but now applied it not just to survival sewing, but to creative projects that expressed his inner world. "You arrived early," commented Michael, finding Richard in the hallway. "I wanted to hear you play." The boy smiled, a little embarrassed. "I'm preparing a song for when Mom comes home." On the way to the hospital, Michael chatted about his day at school, about a new friend, about ideas for the room they were preparing for Teresa. Richard listened attentively, amazed at the child's ability to look forward, to build hope even after everything he had lived through. At the hospital, a surprise awaited. Teresa was sitting in a chair by the window, without the usual tubes and monitors. Her face, still thin, had more color, and her smile upon seeing her son illuminated the entire room. "Mom, you're sitting!" exclaimed Michael, running to carefully hug her. "Dr. Marcus said I need to regain my strength to go home," she replied, kissing her son's forehead. Richard observed the scene with a full heart. The experimental treatment was working. There was real hope for recovery, although the path was still long. While Michael showed his mother his latest drawings, Richard spoke with Dr. Marcus in the hallway. "We're cautiously optimistic," explained the doctor. "Teresa is responding well, but she'll need constant care for at least a year. Regular hospital visits, controlled medication, a strictly monitored routine." "She'll have all that," guaranteed Richard. "I've already hired a specialized nurse, and we've adapted a complete room in the apartment." Dr. Marcus smiled. "You know, when you arrived here months ago, paying for an extremely expensive treatment for a stranger, I confess I suspected your intentions. Now I see I was completely mistaken. What you've done for this family is extraordinary." Richard shook his head. "What they've done for me is what's extraordinary, Doctor. Michael and Teresa taught me the meaning of family, something that, at 45 years old, I had never truly understood." That night, while Michael slept peacefully, hugging his old, mended teddy bear, Richard reflected on the twists of fate. A simple visit to collect overdue rent had transformed into the turning point of his existence. He who had built an empire with calculating coldness discovered that the true value of life was in bonds that no money could buy. At his homework desk, he finalized documents that would guarantee Michael's financial stability, regardless of what the future held. Next to them rested the project for his newest venture, a foundation dedicated to children in vulnerable situations and professional training in manual arts, inspired by Michael's extraordinary abilities. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Dr. Paul, his lawyer. "Richard, it's confirmed the judge accepted the petition. You are officially Michael's legal co-guardian, along with Teresa. No one can take him from you, not even if Claudia tries to claim biological rights." "Thank you, Paul. That means a lot," replied Richard, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Hanging up, he contemplated the photograph on the wall. Him, Teresa, and Michael on one of their Sundays in the park. A family built not by blood, but by the choice to love and protect each other no matter what happened. The big day finally arrived. Richard's apartment was unrecognizable. Flowers in every corner, a colorful banner with the words, "Welcome to our home," and delicious aromas coming from the kitchen, where Mrs. Iris prepared special treats. Michael, dressed in his favorite shirt, couldn't stay still, running from one side to the other, checking every detail for Teresa's arrival. "What if she doesn't like the room?" he asked anxiously, for the 10th time. Richard smiled, adjusting a final detail in the flower arrangement. "She'll love it, Michael, especially because you chose every detail." Teresa's room had been completely adapted. Comfortable hospital bed disguised as a normal piece of furniture, medical equipment discreetly positioned, and Michael's big project, an immense panel of colorful patchwork covering an entire wall, her telling through embroidery the story of that unlikely family. At 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Michael ran to the door but stopped, suddenly nervous. Richard placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, conveying confidence. "Shall we go together?" The boy nodded and the two opened the door. Teresa was there in a wheelchair pushed by Dr. Marcus. Despite her physical fragility, her eyes shone with emotion. "Welcome to your new home," said Richard, bending down to hug her. Michael couldn't say anything. He simply threw himself into his mother's arms, sobbing with joy. The adaptation to the new routine was gradual. Teresa gained strength daily, first managing to walk around the apartment with help, then participating in meals at the table, and finally accompanying Michael and Richard on small walks through the condominium garden. The nurse hired by Richard, Mrs. Martha, quickly became part of the family, with her simple wisdom and stories from rural Wisconsin. One afternoon, while Michael was at school, Teresa asked to talk with Richard on the balcony. "I'll never have enough words to thank you," she began. "You literally saved our lives." Richard shook his head. "No, Teresa, Michael and you saved mine. I existed, but I wasn't really living before I met you." "And now," she asked hesitantly, "when I'm completely recovered, what happens?" The question hung in the air. Richard realized they had never really discussed the long-term future. The focus had always been Teresa's recovery, Michael's security, the legal battles. "What do you wish to happen?" he returned. Teresa looked at the city view, carefully choosing her words. "Michael loves you. I see how his eyes shine when he talks about you two sailing, building models, studying together. He never had a father figure, and now—" She hesitated. "I'm afraid of taking that away from him when we leave." Richard felt his heart accelerate. "What if you don't leave?" he suggested, keeping his voice steady despite the emotion. "Teresa, this house was never as alive as it is now, with you here. I know our situation is unconventional, but perhaps we can build something permanent." "Like a family?" she asked, a slight blush coloring her pale cheeks. "Exactly like a family," confirmed Richard. "If you want. If Michael wants." That night, the three were dining together when Michael asked one of his surprising questions. "Richard, can you teach me to drive?" Richard almost choked on his juice. "Drive? You're 7 years old, Michael." "Not now," explained the boy, rolling his eyes as if it were obvious. "When I'm old enough, I want to learn to drive a car, a boat, and life, like you're teaching me." Teresa and Richard exchanged emotional looks. "Life," repeated Richard, "is something we're learning together, Michael." The boy smiled, satisfied with the answer, and continued eating. For him, everything seemed simply natural. A new home, a recovering mother, a man who had become an essential part of his world. The wisdom of children, thought Richard, is in accepting love where it is found without question. Later, reviewing contracts in his home office, Richard received a notification from his private investigator. Claudia Thompson had bought a ticket to Chicago, arriving next week. What was she planning? Was it time for a final confrontation or an unlikely reconciliation? Richard closed the laptop, deciding he would face that challenge when it came. For now, he allowed himself to savor the certainty growing in his heart. Regardless of blood, legal documents, or complications of the past, he, Teresa, and Michael had become a true family. And that was more valuable than all the empire he had built. The city was awakening under a fine drizzle when the limousine parked in front of Lakeshore Tower. From inside emerged an elegant woman, impeccably dressed in a grey suit. Claudia Thompson, or Carol Oliver, her real name, carried only an executive folder and an indescribable expression. She was no longer the relentless administrator of Montgomery Developments. Something in her eyes had changed. Richard was waiting in the lobby, having preferred this meeting on neutral territory, away from Teresa and Michael. "Thank you for receiving me," she said, her tone of voice different from what he remembered, less cutting, more vulnerable. "I was surprised by your contact," replied Richard, indicating the discreet armchairs in the corner of the lobby. "Especially after everything that happened." Claudia took a deep breath. "I've been in treatment these past few months, intensive therapy. I realized that—" her voice faltered. that I destroyed many valuable things out of pure resentment. Richard remained, silent, observing her attentively. She seemed sincere, but he had learned to be cautious. I didn't come to ask forgiveness, she continued. What I did is unforgivable, but I needed to deliver this personally. From her folder, she removed an envelope and slid it across the table. Richard opened it cautiously. Inside were legal documents, a formal renunciation of any parental rights over Michael, recognition of the adoption by Teresa, and a bank account in the boy's name. "It's my share of our parents' inheritance," explained Claudia. "The one I always accused Teresa of stealing, although I knew it was a lie. I kept it all these years, feeding my anger. Now I understand it belongs to Michael." Richard studied the documents, stunned by the turnaround. "Why now?" "I almost lost everything," she replied, the vulnerability now evident in her voice. "My health, I had a collapse after the scandal. In the hospital, I confronted the person I had become, the choices I made." She paused, looking out the window. "How is he, Michael?" "Happy," replied Richard simply. "He's an extraordinary child." A sad smile passed across Claudia's face. "Like Teresa when we were little. She was always the strong one, the resilient one. Our mother used to say Teresa was born with her own light." Richard realized that for the first time, he was seeing the real Carol, not the Claudia persona she had created. "Would you like to see him?" he asked, surprising himself. Panic crossed her face. "No, I'm not ready. And he doesn't deserve to have his life disturbed again." She stood up abruptly. "Just take care of them, Richard. Do what I was never capable of doing." When Claudia walked out into the fine rain, Richard remained seated, absorbing what had just happened. People could change after all. Some wounds, no matter how deep, could begin to heal. In the apartment, Teresa was anxiously awaiting his return. He had only said he needed to resolve an important issue from the past. "It was her, wasn't it?" asked Teresa as soon as he entered. Always perceptive, even debilitated by illness. Richard nodded, handing her the documents. "She's different, I can't explain it." Teresa examined the papers, silent tears running down her face. "I always hoped that one day Carol would find peace, for her own good, not ours." "Would you forgive her after everything?" Teresa carefully folded the documents. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Richard. It's about liberation. I've carried my sister in my heart since we were children. That never changed, even in the worst moments." Michael entered the room at that instant, carrying his guitar. "I learned a new song," he announced proudly. "Want to hear it?" As the boy played, Richard observed Teresa, amazed by her capacity to love unconditionally. This is what made her an extraordinary mother to Michael, even without biological ties. This is what he wanted to learn from her, the true meaning of family. Weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, Michael officially gained the surname Montgomery Oliver. The judge, touched by the unusual story of this family, made a point of personally conducting the formalization. "Family," explained the magistrate to the boy, "is a concept much larger than what is written on papers, but today we're celebrating the official recognition of something that already exists in your hearts." Michael, wearing his first suit, chosen with Mrs. Iris's help, looked with admiration at Teresa and Richard side by side. His mother, still using a cane but visibly stronger each day. Richard, the man who had entered their lives as a threatening stranger and became his protector and guide. As he signed his new name with careful, childish handwriting, Michael asked a question that had silently hovered between them for months. "Now can I call you Dad?" Silence fell over the room. Teresa squeezed Richard's hand, who knelt to be at eye level with the boy. "It would be the greatest honor of my life, Michael," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. That afternoon, as the three walked through Grant Park, Michael running ahead, Teresa and Richard side by side, hands discreetly interlaced, the businessman who once believed everything came down to numbers and contracts contemplated the miracle of his new life. "What are you thinking about?" asked Teresa, noticing his distant look. "About how rich we are," he replied, smiling. "Not from money or success, but from all this." He indicated Michael, who was playing with other boys, finally free to simply be a child. Teresa squeezed his hand. You once told me that numbers don't lie, but now you know there are things impossible to calculate. Like the value of a true family, completed Richard. In the distance, Michael waved to them, inviting them to come closer. His small face radiated the purest joy, that of a child who, after facing storms beyond his years, had finally found his safe harbor. And as they walked toward the boy, Richard and Teresa knew that, regardless of the challenges the future held, they would face everything together. For they had learned the most valuable lesson, that family isn't defined by blood or documents, but by the daily choice to love, protect, and remain, no matter what happens.